Absolutely. Now we've got Indiana front and center as we dive into Big Ten play. This game on the road where the venue isn't exactly daunting, overwhelming, loud, none of that, but still has been tricky for the Buckeyes to come out with an easy win, even with the likes of 2015, Zeke Elliott and that crew going in there and having a difficult time. And that game going like inside the 5-yard line with Indiana throwing the ball into the end zone to pull out a victory. And obviously the last time they were there was J.K. Dobbins' breakout game as a freshman, game number 1, an August game in which Ohio State had all sorts of issues covering on the outside early in the game, pulled away and won by, I think, 49-21, something in that range. But Indiana's been a difficult place to play, Steve.
Yeah. This will probably be the 10th, 12th, 13th time I've been there for a football game in my number of years over time. And, they now have a 4-lane divided highway pretty much from about 3 miles south of Indianapolis all the way to Bloomington. So that alleviates some of the traffic issues for people trying to get to the game. This is a noon game, which in its own right will suck because everybody's going to leave Indianapolis about 10:15 to try and get there by 11:30 and get in their seat by 12 o'clock for the game. So if you get out ahead of the traffic, you'll be in good shape. Typically, I've seen anywhere from 15 to 20,000 Ohio State fans in attendance at games at Indiana. The place seats about 55,000, and it's usually full, but 1/3 of them are usually Ohio State people. And if you go on the ticket sites, I know you can get into this game matching, believe it or not, 2-0 Ohio State and 2-0 Indiana. If you have $65, you can watch this game live at Memorial Stadium. And I will say it's an okay place to watch a game. I will say, if I had to rank the Big Ten stadiums, it'd probably come in around 9, 10, 11 in that range because I don't think it's as good as Purdue when Purdue's got it going good, or knocking off Ohio State in the night game last year, or certainly not as good as Iowa and some of the other places. But it's maybe a little bit underrated as a place to watch a game because all the seats are pretty close to the action. And as you put it, Ohio State on paper has won 24 straight games against Indiana, including the 2010 game, which was vacated by NCAA sanctions, but it was definitely played, and Ohio State blew them out in Jim Tressel's triumphant final season that never was as the Ohio State coach. And that string dates to a tie. In 1990, it was 27-27 at Indiana. The only 2 times Ohio State has lost to Indiana since 1952 came in back-to-back seasons. 1987, which was, as Earl Bruce said, OSU's darkest day, 31-10 at Ohio Stadium. Woo, that was awful. And then the following year, John Cooper's first season was darkest day too. They went out to Indiana and lost 41-7. And I think Anthony Thompson was at the running back. He's still leaping over the pile for more touchdowns as we speak. So those were 2 that really stood out over time. I was an undergrad at Ohio State in that period in 87 and 88. And you really almost had to smuggle in your own 6-pack of beer to be able to sit through the football. It was that bad. So, and thankfully they didn't check you. You don't go through a metal detector like you do now. Otherwise you couldn't bring in your own 6-pack of beer. But at any rate, I digress. The last 3 trips, as you said, 52-49, the game where they finally realized they had to put, Zach Boren from fullback over to linebacker, and he saved their bacon at middle linebacker. They had no linebackers that season. I think it was Etienne Sabino got hurt, and Shazier was not quite Shazier yet, or whatever it was. In 2012, They win every game, 12-0. They beat Purdue in overtime at home, which was probably the closest call, but this one was right there, 52-49 at Indiana. Didn't play there again until 2015. Zeke Elliott had touchdown runs, believe it or not, 50 yards, 60 yards, and 70 yards for good measure, and they only win the game 34-27 because Cardale Jones could not convert in the red zone to save his life. And that was when the Tide switched back to JT Barrett to finish that season. We know how the fickle finger of fate did not go their way. Had Cardale played against Michigan State later that year, maybe things would have been a little bit different. But at any rate, that was a remarkable game. And then, of course, 2 years ago, season opener, Thursday night, Kirk Herbstreit's there. They do kind of a limited game day as they did this year on the Thursday night. And Ohio State was predicted to have a great team that season in 2017, and yet they left whatever mojo they had back on the Mick Marotti field on July 15th out there in a 90-degree heat and had nothing for the opener. They had no juice, no nothing, and were trailing 14-13 at halftime, still trailing after a turnover on downs, I want to say with 5-6 minutes to go in the third period, and still in the final 20 minutes of the game blew them out and won the game 49-20, I think was the final score, something along those lines. So what that tells you, and I know the last 5 times they've played, Ohio State has only covered, or as they say, beat the spread or covered the spread one time in those 4 years, which I think was that game, the 49-20 game, where they was a backdoor cover, trailing the entire game and get it at the end. Otherwise, Ohio State has not, as the guys in Vegas would say, met the number in the other 4 times they've played Indiana in the last 5 years. So if you're not on guard to play Indiana after that whole diatribe that I just went through, then you don't deserve to be Big Ten champions, because Ohio State's dominated this conference with 10 championships in the last 18 seasons, won or shared their division in each of the, last 7 years under Urban Meyer. They always won the division or tied for it. And that starts on Saturday for real at Indiana. So young guys on the team, be ready. This isn't Indiana, which they wouldn't know anything about, how Ohio State used to beat them 50-6 every time they played them. This is a little different animal now.
Yeah, certainly at the point that Earl Bruce made that statement after they lost, as you mentioned, 31-10 in 1987, which was a string of very close losses. That was the one blowout loss as they were blown out inexplicably by the Hoosiers, because, as you mentioned, it was unfathomable to imagine Indiana playing in a game competitively with Ohio State, let alone beat them, because all the string of scores in the 70s and 80s were, and just a few years prior to that were a lot of 52-3s and 48-7s, and a lot of those against IU. I noticed that Saturday's spread is only 14 points. Now, I certainly jumped all over the Buckeyes, giving only 15.5 against Cincinnati last week, and felt good about that. And I'm kind of eyeing the same type deal, and I know it's on the road.
When I looked at it today on Covers.com, which is where I go to kind of get updated information, it had actually been bet up to 16.5 at this point. Okay. So I think whether that's public money or the sharps or whoever's out there early has hammered that 14.5, 15, and now it's up over 16. So I think people are realizing that Indiana has a decent enough team. They might win 6 games, 7 games, and get to a bowl. But their quarterback is a redshirt freshman. He threw 2 picks in the season opener against Ball State, neither of which were good throws or even close to his receivers. It was basically right to the Ball State defender. He's a young guy. Ohio State chews up and spits out young quarterbacks who have hardly played. So I think that's probably he's a good player, but I think we have to buyer beware this and say, Ohio State's got the potential to force him into 3 turnovers very easily on Saturday.